Jack is running to outrun the storm, and the race has come to its darkest point with the end far away. He runs fast, doing his best to reach that point of exhaustion where thoughts are lost in physical reaction. The rain and wind coming in turn the bright evening into night in an instant. At the crossroads, he follows the path through the field. The leaves of the oilseeds cling to his ankles. The flowers stain his flesh with dirty yellow pollen and smell of death. The rain runs down his feet into his boots. Now the wind blows in his face and his limbs grow cold, drowning out the pain. Eventually, he finds shelter in a hedge, and his feet carry him down the grassy path by themselves, his mind slipping away from his body. He wants to run on, but he knows he must return home. Time will tell what he must do. When he gets home, it is dark and very late, and he hopes Caroline is asleep, but he finds that all the lamps are lit and his wife is in the kitchen. She lifts her head, and he wonders what he sees in those big brown eyes. Relief, panic, regret, pity, contempt, impatience with his histrionics. She comments on his shabby appearance, but he turns to the sink and without taking a cup, tilts his head and drinks from the faucet as if from a waterfall. Then he takes a shower and goes to bed. There is no room for self-pity here, and tomorrow life will seem better. But for now, he can't imagine how his life could ever be right again. Next chapter. Tuesday was Damien's day. Caroline woke up with thoughts of their meeting, and those thoughts occupied her as she got the children out of bed, dressed them for school, and sat them down to eat the cornflakes and eggs laid out in the kitchen by Jack, who had already left for work. She had little time for her own preparations, but she performed all her duties with the utmost care. She showered, put on makeup, did her hair, and put on her new business suit. Then she put the kids in the car and raced across town to Amy's school. As always, Amy rushed happily to the playground without looking back. Then to Ben's school, where he joined the throng of arrivals with apparent reluctance but no protest. Having fulfilled her maternal duties, Caroline tried to get to work on time in the traffic, determined to work 2 hours until it was time. She more or less succeeded. She concentrated on going over the wording of the contract and hoped very much that she was hiding her excitement from her colleagues. At 11:30, she left work, taking her iPad with her to stay in touch via email. Damien lived in a modern complex in the center of Dixboro, a small town 5 miles outside of the city, and she drove down the clear road, delighting in every familiar sight along the way. Damien was waiting for her at the door of his modern 3-story home, tall and slender, dressed in a mottled plaid shirt. Saying almost nothing, they immediately fell into each other's arms, and she carried Damien into the bedroom. Time was precious. Afterward, they ate the lunch Damien had prepared earlier, a salad with smoked salmon, shrimp, and avocado. As always, it was delicious, and she wished she had a glass of wine, but not only did she have to get back to work, she was determined not to lose her temper in anything involving Damien. Details and discipline mattered when dealing with this major issue in her life. The affair, and that was what Caroline called it for herself, was unexpected, unplanned, and the kind of thing she thought could never happen. Overcome with surprise, she realized that things would have to go her way. She would be careful. It would remain a secret between her and her lover, and she would not let it affect her family. She met up with Damien on her lunch break, stretched out with little time to spare. Communication was limited to work email and a phone bought specifically for that purpose and kept in the locked glove compartment of her car. Damien was mostly fine with these restrictions. It made it easier for him to keep his bachelor life in a compartment, and he didn't want to tie himself into any messy commitments. From time to time, they found an opportunity to meet outside these restrictions, but only when she was sure there was no risk. All this was happening unaccountably and through no fault of her own, and she wasn't about to make a drama out of the natural human instinct for love and friendship. Her love for Jack hadn't diminished one bit. Rather the opposite. Her cup overflowed with love, and as a consequence, she was able to pursue her husband and family life with more energy and enthusiasm than usual. Having come to terms with her fate, she became happier, more confident, and more alive to the world around her. This is what a woman should be, and she was surprised that it took her so long to realize what she was missing. Life went on as before, but more lively and purposeful. She paid a lot of attention to Jack to make sure her absences weren't having a detrimental effect, and it made her feel like they had never been so good together. She knew him so well and could be sure he knew nothing. He kept busy doing his own thing, spent a lot of time playing silly games with the kids, was affectionate around the house and in bed, and paid almost no attention to her explanations as to why her workday was a little longer, to make up for the flexible schedule for longer lunch hours. She appreciated Jack for his tolerance, kindness, calmness, skill with children, and resilience in adversity. He could help them with anything. She had always been able to read his feelings, and if there was the slightest hint of letting her adventures overpower him, she would end them. It would take moral strength, but she could handle it long before any real harm was done. Leading a secret life wasn't easy, but she handled it with flying colors. When she retired and became a grandmother, she would look back on that time with pride and pleasure. Living life to the fullest was everyone's duty. Nevertheless, the burden was upon her, and the secret life presented her with endless practical challenges. One of the pleasant aspects of her affair was the enthusiasm she and Damien had for theater and music, things that were completely outside Jack's range of interest. Jack hated all kinds of histrionics. It was his great weakness, while she enjoyed drama and showmanship, the outburst of emotion in dance and music, showmanship and performance. All of this was foreign to her work and family, and she only realized what it meant to her because of Damien. Damien often offered to go to shows, but she had to decline most of the time. It was too much of a risk and didn't fit within the discipline she'd established to protect Jack and the kids. She wasn't going to spend her evenings away from home, and she didn't want to risk being seen with her lover amongst the local crowd. She wanted Damien to get over it, and she didn't like the fact that he continued to insist on his own way. Excuses for prolonged debauchery were rare. Once Damien had taken a vacation when she'd stayed in London overnight for work, and they'd gone to the opera and spent the night in a hotel. Another time, Jack had to take the kids to her parents and leave them for the weekend. Normally, she would have gone with them, but in this case, she had a plausible excuse. She was coming home from work later than was convenient for Jack. She insisted that he go without her. Then it was decided that Jack would stay the night so he could enjoy her father's wine and not worry about going over the legal driving limit. "Come back early or the weekend will be ruined," Caroline said, as she kissed him goodbye, and within an hour of him leaving, she was with Damien. It was too late to get to the show, but they had a great dinner at a restaurant Damien knew and were together until 3 in the morning. She was in her bed long before Jack arrived, sleepy and wanting breakfast. In many ways, she and Damien fit together. They watched DVDs while they ate lunch, listened to music, and entertained themselves. They were precious moments when she felt completely herself, without having to behave to please others. Yes, Damien made demands, but they were an expression of his love, and her willingness to give him almost anything he wanted reflected her contentment. Of course she loved him. They never talked about Jack or where their affair might lead. What they had was too precious to jeopardize it. Even gift-giving came with certain rules. Damien could only give ephemeral or symbolic gifts, nothing that would later arouse suspicion. One could give a book she could buy herself, or cosmetics that Jack would never recognize as expensive, or food that would leave no trace. But no flowers or jewelry or clothes. And even when they went out to eat, which they did whenever the circumstances of their workday allowed, they drove far, and Caroline tried to choose something that wouldn't leave a mark on her breath, and eat it so that there would be room left over for an evening meal with her family. All that was left was to have a plan and stick to it. Damien made no secret of the fact that he was a bachelor by choice, explaining that it allowed him to keep his strictly masculine home as he pleased and entertain a large circle of friends. He was not attached to anyone, so he had no trouble introducing his lover to his friends as his girlfriend. At first, Caroline was wary and wanted to be sure that these friends did not know Jack or her other life. But she was used to being Damien's latest girlfriend and enjoyed the rare social outings, confident that all precautions had been taken. Be that as it may, She and Damien wanted to be alone most of the time, but when the opportunity arose, she enjoyed going to dinner with his friends. She understood his need to show off his love interest, and for her, it was a way to take the pressure off their meetings and act like it was a normal relationship. Another benefit of the affair was Caroline's new confidence and energy at work. She was able to discuss her work with Damien in a way she couldn't with Jack, who had his own busy schedule. He helped her develop a new communication strategy that raised her profile with senior management, and her success in maintaining the interest of such an intelligent man gave her the confidence to put her ideas forward at work. Successfully managing two lives and having Damien's support made her stronger and better. She felt a sense of irony when, at the end of the board meeting, the CEO took her aside and informed her that she would likely be offered the new position of operations manager, actually general manager. For the first time in her affair, her heart snapped and stabbed. She longed for the job, and it pained her that she would be successful as a result of her secret affair. Even though she realized she was being unreasonable, she told her boss that she would turn down the job. It was wrong to agree under the circumstances, and she didn't feel able to manage a family, a new job, and a demanding affair. Next chapter. For the first time, she wondered if she could justify her incomplete life with Damien. She and Jack had been married for 12 years, and it seemed like an eternity. They had a cozy home, an 11-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl, and a career that was getting more and more interesting. A lover was never part of their plans. She was not at all the flirtatious type. Even the opposite, she was rather stern. The first thing she noticed when she met Damien was his gray hair, like wire, curling over his temples and around his ear. His height was accentuated by a well-tailored, elegant aquascutum suit, a bright pink tie, and impeccably manicured nails. He was one of a group of unremarkable management consultants her employers had brought in to help with strategic planning. She worked for a mid-sized market research company specializing in online and telephone surveys, and it felt like they were being squeezed in the market by a few large players with an increasingly dominant position. Either they needed to grow on their own or find a specialized or profitable niche where they could be safe. The consultants worked through some future scenarios to help them decide on a strategy. There had been several fruitless workshops when Caroline was sure they were getting nowhere, and the boring men in smart suits seemed to laugh at their stupidity. But then she was involved in a series of one-on-one meetings in which she was questioned about her specialized knowledge. She immediately sensed that perhaps they were onto something worthwhile, and she had a sense of purpose. Until her first meeting alone with Damien, she hadn't perceived consultants as individuals. He had built a cost model based on volume of activity, and his questions about her work were pointed and demanding. They had one meeting and he asked for another because they weren't done yet. At first, she was impressed by the speed of his thinking and the ease with which he internalized her explanations and formulated them into concepts and structures. It was a good discussion, and she felt that he understood the complexity of her work in a way that no one else did. Only then did she begin to notice how good-looking he was. Fresh as a boy, clean-shaven. She figured he must be working out or out with his buddies in the evenings. She liked the fact that his exercise made him covered in healthy muscle, whereas Jack, who ran, was skin and bones from head to toe. His manners, too, were polished, and he had the calm, authoritative way of speaking adopted by counselors all over the world, never wondering what people were saying and always seeming to understand them. She could talk to him about anything. Later, when the project was coming to an end, he invited her to lunch, promising to informally familiarize her with the main findings and recommendations of the report. She was honored by his confidence. As it turned out, they spent most of the lunch talking about art and theater. In the first few minutes, in response to polite questions about each other, they discovered a shared interest in Broadway musicals. Caroline started to tell Damien about her family, but knowing it wouldn't interest him, she began looking for something more appropriate to discuss. It turned out that they had both been to an opera performance given by a local touring company from Glyndebourne. Musical performances followed, and soon nothing could stop their conversation. It wasn't until they were having coffee that they moved on to recommendations for business strategy. The recommendations were radical, and she listened with interest to Damien's arguments in her favor, immediately deciding that she agreed with him. By then, she had managed to get over the shock. It had happened at the very beginning of lunch, and she'd realized right away that there was no escaping her feelings. It wasn't that he was handsome. It wasn't that he understood her so well. It wasn't that he was cultured and intelligent. It wasn't that he had a brilliant career. He had all those qualities, but she felt a deeper, spiritual connection to the man she thought she should have known all her life. The shock disoriented her. They talked about trivia that didn't matter, and in a moment, she was already in love. The crush gripped her like a strangler's hand, and she could fight it, but she couldn't break free. She didn't trust the feeling at first. She was a married woman with a family. A happily married woman, which she was, does not fall in love. Nothing provokes her. Her love for her husband was a shield through which not the slightest hint of passion could penetrate. Her heart was already an overflowing vessel. She was not a teenager. She owned her feelings and could not love this man. But never before had anything like this happened to her. Her chatter became forced, and she was sure she must be looking at Damien like a blue-eyed girl. He didn't seem to notice anything, eating happily and chatting easily, responding to her every line. By the end of the meal, she realized she had to become his mistress or die unsatisfied. Her first thought was that she would have to leave Jack and the children and start a new life with Damien. She couldn't imagine sneaking around behind Jack forever, afraid of forgetting some detail of the deception required for a secret affair. She also didn't like living with the guilt she imagined she would feel about deceiving her husband and children. She needed to work up the courage to decide on a clean break. A week passed, during which she and Damien exchanged emails intensely on their work accounts, not discussing the new strategy too much because the consultant's report had caused a heated fight among Caroline's executive board members. It shocked her that family life continued as before. She pulled herself together and looked into Jack's eyes, knowing that her love for Damien overwhelmed her to the brim. She wanted him to say something, to at least notice that something big had happened to her. He smiled happily and kissed her cheek. He saw nothing, knew nothing of the momentous change in her life, and instead of shame, she felt relief and satisfaction that she had deceived him. It was incredible. She had fallen in love with a stranger, and her husband had noticed nothing. How could he have been so careless about something so important to her? She felt a surge of pride in her superiority. If Jack hadn't noticed anything, how could he have been hurt by her action? She and Damien agreed to meet again under the pretense of discussing one of the many issues raised in the consultant's report. She'd arrived at the restaurant, and instead of a business handshake, they'd fallen into each other's arms. They couldn't stay on their feet and could barely sit still during the meal. She fiddled with her food, and he looked at her with cruelty. They had nothing to say and left as soon as they could. Damien drove them out of town and down the winding paths to the hay pasture. It was all consuming, and there was no guilt. Then they only headed back to town when the sun was behind the hedge, and they were in the shade. Next chapter. Are the kids ready for school, honey? Caroline whizzes around the kitchen between various preparations for the day, running the washing machine and bagging Ben's sports kit, brushing Amy's hair while she eats her cereal, and asking her about her new teacher. Jack finishes his coffee, clears the table, and loads the dishwasher, calls the kids to order, says goodbye to his wife, and leaves the house. It's going to be another long day. He works with manic intensity, doesn't stop for lunch, and continues until 7. Then he gets in the car and drives home. Dinner is waiting for him there, but he goes to the bathroom and splashes water on his face before finding his children. Betrayal catches up with him suddenly, and Jack finds solace in running and the company of Ben and Amy. What better antidote to the cynical manipulation and betrayal of adults than children absorbed in play? He plays a computer game with Ben and reads a story to Amy. He's putting himself out there, not least so that he doesn't have to think about where Caroline is. When Amy asks if she can stay until her mother arrives, he replies, "Not tonight, dear. She may be a little late, and you can say hello to her tomorrow morning. I'll read you another story." She cries a little, but soon calms down and falls asleep. Now Jack has nothing to think about but Caroline and what he has to do the next day. He sits in front of the TV and still can't figure out how she did it. Where did she find the strength, or for that matter, the time, to have an affair while working full-time and raising a family? Tomorrow, Jack is going to deal with it one way or another. He's not sure it will make a difference, but he needs to know more. He suffers from the fear of loss and loneliness, but the anger deep inside protects him from despair. He will not be ruined by the stupidity of others, nor will he act in anger. He will live as if nothing has happened until he is ready. Only then will he act. It's about 10 o'clock, the news is on the TV, and he hears the front door click open. "Hey, honey, are the kids in bed yet?" It's Caroline, bright and alert even after a long day at work and a lover to propitiate. How does she manage it? And has she realized she started calling him cute? "It's so good to see you, Jack. I hope you had a good day. I'm tired. Hot chocolate and off to bed. What a day. Are you ready to join me?" "You look awful, honey," he says, stepping back. "Like you've been trampled by a herd of buffalo. Been fighting for the team again?" She throws him a strange look. "I never understand a word you say, Jack. Our clients are mostly very civilized, and I never get into a fight." Jack smiles inwardly, amused that Caroline can't understand the literal meaning of his remark. When he first discovered her lies, he had decided to act as if nothing had changed. But he soon changed that rule, and now prefers ambiguous remarks designed to upset her without making it clear that he knows her secret. It works every time, and she backs away in confusion. The knowledge came in the form of tawdry details after a period of growing doubt. It actually started with her calling him cute. That's what she'd called her boyfriend when Jack had first met her at university, a boorish lout who hung around her without any conversation or manners. She lost him after a semester, and about a year later became Jack's girlfriend. The word sweetheart never left her lips. First, she jokingly called him my buddy, then my lover, then dear and dearest. Now she had apparently forgotten that the word sweetheart had negative associations, or even that she hadn't called him that. That was until she met the Amazon. A few weeks before Ben's birthday, they were discussing what to buy him as a present. She found a computer game they thought he wanted and asked Jack to check that it was the right one. He took her seat at the computer, which had the Amazon page open, and started reading the specifications. He said he thought it was right, but Caroline was off somewhere. The hour was approaching that guaranteed delivery the next day, so he pressed the button to put the game in his cart and check it out. And then he was surprised. The screen prompted him to choose between two delivery addresses, their own and that of a stranger, Damien Curd. He stared at the screen for a while, wrote down the address, backed out of the purchase, and clicked on her previous orders. There, a month ago, was an order sent to Damien Curd at a stranger's address, a set of choral music on CD. Then he went back to the game page, came up and found Caroline in the kitchen. "This is the same game. I left it on the screen for you to buy," he said curtly, and headed for his office. A quick internet search on his own computer turned up an entry for Damien Curd, a partner in a regional management consulting firm, an economist specializing in marketing strategies. Could Caroline have bought the discs as a gift for a plausible work reason? Of course she could, and if he had no other suspicions, he could leave it at that. When Caroline went upstairs, he took her phone out of her bag and checked the address book. There was no entry for Damien Curd. The recent calls list didn't give much away because he didn't know Damien's number, but it didn't have any frequent unknown callers. If Damien was a work contact, it was likely that they only communicated on a work phone. When he had the chance, he checked her car. He immediately discovered that the glove compartment was locked, and of course he opened it with the door key. The phone was in a small toiletry bag full of toiletries and showed an unanswered message. It was from Dem and Reed. Normal plan. Can't wait. Love millions. It took less than an hour to learn everything he needed to know to destroy his family. That's what he thought until he spent an hour alone in his room, digesting the panic. First, he realized he needed to know a lot more about this love affair. Second, he wasn't going to let Caroline dictate what would happen, and he didn't want to lose his children or traumatize their young lives by tearing the family apart. It might take some time, but he would figure out what he wanted and make it happen. He felt nothing but hatred for Damien, a corrupt and evil presence that had somehow worked its way into the heart of his family. Then he went for a run. He has Damien's name and address, and as a result of hours, whole nights, of thinking, he realized he must find out more about his enemy. He takes a day off work and drives to Damien's house. It's 6 miles and 10 minutes from his house. He parks a little ways down the deserted road, walks to the front door, and rings the bell. There is no answer. He walks to the gate on the side of the house. It is unlocked, and he steps out into the garden. A row of houses beyond the end wall overlooks the back of the building, but he is willing to take a reasonable risk. The back door is locked, the windows are closed, except for the bathroom window on the second floor. A revolving washing line stands in the middle of the garden. He puts on surgical gloves, collapses the washing line, pulls it out of its fixing hole, and leans it at an angle against the back wall of the house. He climbs onto the steel frame and balances precariously on top, one hand resting on a drain pipe. From there, he climbs with his foot onto the grill of the exhaust fan, and from there he climbs to the ledge of the bathroom window. He swings the window wide open, bends over, unlocks the large skylight, swings it open, and climbs in. It takes no more than 5 minutes. He closes the dormer window and wipes the footprint off the tiled windowsill and toilet seat he climbed down on. At first, he doesn't know what to do. He goes downstairs, unlocks the back door so he has an escape route, and replaces the spinning laundry line. Then he looks in all the rooms for evidence of Caroline's presence. It would be too much to expect a photograph or a letter, but he looks through the open letters on the mantelpiece and the photos pinned to a chalkboard in the kitchen. In the center of the wall hangs a large framed photograph of a young man in a ribbed football outfit with a rugby football under one arm and a silver calf in the other. Jack stares at his nemesis, taking in his triumphant look, the youthful vigor and brilliance of a man who has everything he wants. It's creepy, prying into the life of his wife's lover, and he feels disgusted. He crosses to the kitchen and finds a bunch of keys in a drawer. A quick check reveals that one of them is the spare key to the front door. A sudden inspiration hits him. He leaves the house, drives downtown, and makes a duplicate. Half an hour later, he is back in the house, and his enemy's defenses are finally breached. While waiting for the key to be cut, he realized what he had to do. The centerpiece of Damien's office is a high-end computer with a large screen. He turns it on, and Windows loads. There is no password protection. Damien lives alone. He opens his browser and finds webmail in his bookmarks list. He clicks on it, and it opens. The username and password are memorized on the computer. Jack has to sit down. He checks the time, looks out the window, and turns to the screen again. The first thing that catches his eye is his wife's email address in the From column of Damien's mailbox. It's full of emails from Caroline. He clicks on the most recent one. Good morning, love. 1 day left until the culmination of my week. He closes his eyes, not wanting to read, but there's more. Listen, love, I have an idea to give us more happiness. Jack is supposed to go with the kids to my parents' house Friday night. I can have another late meeting and we can be together. He has to drive 200 miles there and back so we could spend the evening together. What do you say? Damien hasn't answered yet, and Jax feels like answering for him. But he knows he shouldn't give Damien any reason to suspect he's been robbed. In any case, he has a better answer. He has a late meeting on Friday, too. The kid's visit to his in-laws will have to be postponed. Jack feels a sudden revulsion at his meddling, and then an urgent need to get out of the house, away from Damien Curd. He turns off the computer, takes a quick look around the rooms to make sure there's no sign of his visit, and walks out the front door. At home, he has a lot to think about. He texts his wife, "Leaving early. Pick up the kids from school. Trouble on Friday. Late shift. Taking the kids to my parents Saturday morning. Okay?" If he needs any more proof of Caroline's viciousness, it's her reaction. She can't hide her disappointment and wants to punish Jack. Of course, she can't explain the reason for her bad mood and instead finds faults in everything he does. She pushes away a dish he has prepared and tells him that it is unfit to eat. She then reprimands him for giving the children sticky molasses pudding. The children yell at her in a rage, and she slaps Ben. "What's the matter, honey?" says Jack. "Did someone interfere with your indomitable will?" "Don't call me sweetie," she snaps back. "You know I don't like it." Later, as she waits for him to read her a story, Amy says, "Why is Mommy mad at you? You're the best daddy in the world, and I wish she wouldn't." "She's having a hard time," Jack replies. "She doesn't know she's doing it, and she doesn't want to upset you. Now pick your story." Soon they are immersed in a story about heroic and magical cats who team up with mice to save the world from disaster. Next chapter. Jack wakes up on the day Caroline meets her lover and wanders around the bedroom, watching curiously as his wife gets ready. As far as he can tell, she doesn't do much except frown at his unfamiliar delay. Finally, when she's dressed and about to leave, she says, "I'm sorry I was out of sorts last night. I had a rough day at work. But I feel great today. Let me cook tonight and make something we all love." "You do that," he says, looking her straight in the eye, surprised at his calmness. "And don't wear yourself out, or I'll trade you in for a fancy new model." "You wouldn't do that," she says hastily, lowering her eyes. "It's not the least bit funny." "It's not funny. Right." She waits to see what else he'll say, but he smiles and walks away, not at all sure of his composure. As he drives to work, the urge to go back to Damien's house overwhelms him. It's irrational because he doesn't need any new evidence of his wife's infidelity, and he knows his wife will be there on her lunch break. Jack is not a voyeur. He can't imagine a worse nightmare than catching Caroline with a lover. But succumbing to the obsession, he swerves off his usual route and feels he's the one in the wrong when he takes the road out of town against traffic. Parking at a market cross, he calls work to say he's not feeling well and asks his secretary to cancel meetings. Fatalism overwhelms him. He doesn't put on gloves or ring the bell to make sure the house is empty. Instead, he unlocks Damien's front door and walks right in. He takes a risk because part of his soul wants a confrontation, a reason to act. In the hallway, he stops and listens. There is a clock ticking somewhere, but otherwise the house is quiet. He soon has the eerie feeling that he knows Damien Curd as a friend, and oddly enough, admires how easily he got what he wanted. Heart pounding frantically, he quickly looks around, turns on his computer, feeling an urgent need to find out from his email how the novel is progressing. He reads the succession of messages between the lovers, trying to decipher the awkward expressions of affection, defiance, and love. And there is no doubt that they love each other. Caroline's affectionate words are sincere. She tries to flatter and tease and is not at all shy about bribing with the promise of food or her body. Damien is a bit formal and stilted in his responses. He tries his best to bring a bit of feeling to his expressions of desire. But then again, there is no doubt that he loves her. When he is denied a meeting, he is pathetic in his disappointment. He reads Caroline's message that the meeting on Friday is canceled. Jack has ruined everything. No meeting on Friday. Am I disappointed? You bet I am. But I'll make it up to you tomorrow, lover boy. Damien's response is long, but the gist of it is that he can't bear to see his hopes nurtured and then dashed. Caroline has to find a way to let them be together anymore. "Don't play with my feelings," he reprimands her. "Because I've never felt this way about someone before. And I'm already enduring torment because I'm forced to share you with your husband. I take the pain to be with you, but please don't make it worse than it needs to be." He intends to read the letters quickly and get to work, but lingers, wanting to know more about his nemesis. He browses through books in the living room, lots of new literary fiction, and DVDs, classic film noir, European New Wave movies, and music. Classical, opera, some jazz, and Broadway musicals. This is the act of a loser, because it makes him feel inferior, and he barks at himself. He sits in the kitchen feeling creepy and stupid, not knowing what to do. On impulse, he turns on the expensive stainless steel coffee maker he sees on the table, takes a mug from the cupboard, and places it under the spout. There's a slot for the milk container, and he opens the refrigerator to see if it's in place. On the shelf above the milk are cardboard boxes of bean salad, couscous, mozzarella, peppers, and tomatoes. On another shelf are smoked salmon, Parma ham, and goat cheese, a ready-made lunch for two lovers. A container of milk sits in the door next to a bottle of Chablis. He takes it out, sets it on the coffee maker, and sits motionless while it, hissing and grinding, makes him a cappuccino. It's delicious. In a daze, Jack sits at the kitchen table and drinks his coffee. The situation is unfathomable. How can she love this man and continue to live at home like nothing happened? But he knows that's the wrong question. The only question that matters is what this means for their marriage, and there's no easy answer here. It's not even about whether he loves Caroline. They've lived together so long that this feels more like a betrayal of a brother. He can even see how this stab in the back was delivered. Caroline is bold and impetuous, wanting to not miss out on any fun events. This is one of the traits that first attracted him to her. She is also consumed with her own worries and afraid of conflict. She'd rather do something like break his new hi-fi and try to cover up the consequences than admit her act and worry about it. Betrayal followed by denial should be an easy choice for her. It's inherent in her character, and the pressures of family life have exposed her weakness. It doesn't make Jack feel any better, but the situation is too serious for him to react in anger. He would like to confront her, force her to admit her criminal, abusive, destructive behavior, but he has to think of his children and take the brunt of the disaster on his own shoulders. That's what men do. Marriages fall apart all the time, and getting out from under the rubble is not through accusations. Either way, no matter what he decides to do, Caroline will suffer. They all will. It's just that his suffering has already begun. Jack hears Caroline's distinctive voice so clearly in her emails, in which she makes remarks directed at him. He can't take it anymore and gets up and wanders around the house, imagining Caroline living there with Dem as his wife and lover. She haunts him, and he can see her so clearly, curled up in the corner of the couch, checking her hair in the hallway mirror, heating up a hot chocolate drink in the microwave last thing at night, head on the pillow, eyes closed, turned on her side toward her lover in the center of the big bed. In the cupboard in the kitchen stand Beauty and Beast. Mugs, just as his and her mugs, stand at home. And in the living room lies a loose disc from the latest House DVD series, just like at home. And in the bathroom stands her toothbrush, the same brand and color as at home. It's as if the house is a vile, theatrical, mocking palimpsest rewriting the original. Their own home of warmth, love, and humanity has been replaced by this fake, kitschy, worthless copy. He's fed up and feeling a little crazy. He goes back to the kitchen and on impulse pulls the lover's lunch out of the fridge, puts the packages in his bag, and carries it to the car. He doesn't know why he did it, or what Damien will think when he discovers that lunch is gone and the coffee cup is on the table. On the way into town, he stops on the side of the road and samples the food, which he sees was purchased at a well-known expensive local deli. He is not hungry and the food is disgusting. Suddenly angry with himself, he collects it all, including the wine, and stuffs it into one of the trash cans among the overflowing fast food wrappers. Now he can't think of anything to do for the rest of the day. He doesn't want to go to work because he said he was sick, and he doesn't want to go home because he doesn't want to be alone. Not for the first time, he wonders if he has the strength to continue this farce. All his energy goes into keeping things together, and it's too much. It would be a relief to decide he can't cope and run away. Let his wife come home to an empty house. But he can't do that with the kids, and he knows there's no alternative to continuing. He'd better get used to being alone, so he goes home and falls asleep, waking up only some time before it's time to pick up the kids from school. It is their custom that the first one home cooks for everyone, unless they have agreed otherwise in advance. Caroline is often late on the days she doesn't pick up the kids, but today he expects her at 6. Now he wonders how many of those late nights involve meetings with Damien. The thought of her being with Damien now cuts unpleasantly into his gut. He ponders the idea while chopping vegetables, looking for the point at which his marriage failed. He must have disappointed Caroline and been too consumed to notice the signs of it. After all, he had months to realize his wife was having an affair, and he couldn't. Wasn't that proof enough that there was a chasm between them? He'd thought they were a good match. Her spontaneous common sense and his intellect. But now he wondered if she'd always despised his introversion and lack of fun. Maybe she'd just gotten bored and was looking for something else? 5 minutes later, he discarded that version of infidelity. Caroline was a force of nature, and it was just as likely that he was a victim of bad luck. She met a man by chance and fell in love. There was no intent on her part. She became close to Damien, and the affection grew into love and desire. Finding herself in a false situation, she adapted to a life of deceit and betrayal, unable to find a way out. He throws a potato into the sink and screams as loud as he can. She's ruined everything. She thinks she's sorted out the mess and thinks they can live as they are, husband and lover, with her floundering between them. There should be no pain, at least for her. Let's see who's smarter. She must be thinking. Caroline has never lacked self-confidence. She has a plan, and he plays along with it admirably. She must be very happy. The kids come running to find out why he screamed, and he makes up a story about his funny bone bursting. A few minutes later, Caroline comes in and helps him finish his meal. She is relaxed with him and asks him about how his day went. Jack wonders if she is particularly hungry and wants to eat. "I don't see how you can eat a big lunch and come home to dinner like this," he tells her as they sit down to a table of lamb chops, mashed potatoes, fresh green beans, and gravy. "I only had a sandwich at my table," she replies. No matter how hard he tries, he fails to catch a hint of embarrassment on her face at his lie or concern at being reminded of her lunch. He's still not hungry and gives his chop to Ben, whose appetite is limitless. He doesn't need to talk to Caroline. The kids are content to eat and immersed in their own world of teachers, lessons, and friends who said this, did that. He drops the occasional remark, but mostly observes his wife. She changed into her work suit before joining the cooking and is now wearing a shapeless black top and pants, her hair pulled back and her makeup washed off. She doesn't need to look good for her family. She is relaxed and happy, making remarks to keep the children talking and occasionally casting a glance at her husband. He meets her gaze. "I went out at lunchtime, went to Dixboro, where I remembered there was a traditional hardware store in the street behind the market cross." "Why did you do that, sweetheart?" She's very good. Apart from the fake endearment, there's not a hint of worry or embarrassment, and she hasn't lowered her eyes once. "To see if they had a spare cast iron fireplace grate that would fit our hearth. No luck, but they figured they could get one if I took measurements. I'll probably go back next week. It's a nice little town. Much quieter than here. Maybe we should move there. It's not that bad of a commute." "I don't think so, dear. It's hardly convenient for the schools, and I like it here." "The kids won't be going to school forever. Then we can do whatever we want." Is there a hint of a question in her look? Why is my boring, imagination-deprived, humdrum, dependable husband suddenly saying these things? He lowers his eyes uncertainly and stares at his plate in concentration. How could she do this? He knows his wife, but he can't explain it properly. She is risk-averse and never complains of boredom. Moreover, her work never leaves her time to do anything she would like to do. What she has done is like a form of mental illness. Schizophrenia with two personalities, good and evil, working in tandem, mother and whore. two roles interchangeable and equally suited to her inner self. He just doesn't know her as well as he thought he did. And he's not at all sure he still likes her. She's not his friend. He lies in bed thinking that his marriage defies all explanation. This is where sane couples break up, when faced with an incomprehensible fact that causes incoherent, unspeakable thoughts. Why endure the pain? Why try to understand it when destruction provides a way out? Destroy the marriage, and the problem disappears. He should do it, but he's still not ready. What stops him is fear. Fear of failure and loneliness. He knows he's pathetic. Next chapter. Living a lie has made Caroline a victim of unfamiliar fears. Everything that was said, by herself and others, was scrutinized to make sure there wasn't a chink in her protective armor. The more successful she became, the more important it was to maintain her success. She no longer asked herself why she did it. It was enough that it had happened, and now she and Damien had to let the affair run its course. She loved Jack and her family, but she loved Damien too. She couldn't leave him. There was no point in feeling guilty, and anyway, she was paying for her happiness every day by leading a double life. It no longer surprised her that it was happening. Jack was working too hard. He headed a large analytical group at the bank, doing complex numerical analysis of investment and credit risks. She didn't pretend to understand his work, but she always admired his successes. Along with his salary, he sometimes received terrific bonuses, but there was the pressure of handling complex projects and the hardships and frustrations of working in a difficult and not very favorable business climate. Jack mostly didn't show that he was stressed, but at times he was depressed and difficult to live with. Withdrawn and uncommunicative, snapping at his children and seemingly absorbed in watching sports on TV and reading history, a hobby left over from his university days. If only he would do something spontaneous, show a little joy and spark, she thought, she would never be open to Damien's attentions. She didn't blame Jack. She only wished she had a better understanding of what he needed and didn't feel that he sometimes thought she was desirable. He was smart and deep, and it was easy to feel like an inferior wife, unable to support him. Her primary goal was to make Jack happy, and she was very careful to let Damien distract her from her family. Yes, there were times when on weekends she would get out of what she had once enjoyed doing with her family, but she was hard on herself, and it rarely happened. Most weeks, she only saw Damien during lunch, and the fleeting nature of their encounters made them all the more precious. One of the special benefits of their relationship was that with Damien, there was no need to negotiate and compromise endlessly over the little things in life: who would pick up the kids, who made this mess, why didn't you buy milk when I asked you to, how did you manage to lose my new gloves? She and Damien made their demands bluntly clear to each other and found that they liked the result. Just getting in the car to drive to his house relieved her of the pressures of life, and by the time she arrived, she felt 10 years younger. She couldn't think of anything more blissful than the first embrace and caresses upon arrival, the keen anticipation, the rapid buildup and release of passion. Then, as they cuddled or sat on the couch over dinner and DVDs, the time spent with Damien seemed completely separate to her. So complete, so perfect, it was impossible to think of him as harmful. Caroline would return to the family after these escapades invigorated and full of love, seeing everything in a new, clearer light. The first minutes alone with her husband always passed under tension as she digested the irrational fear that he must know what she had done, that it was imprinted on her flesh, that the blush was still on her face and visible to all. But he kissed her calmly or patted her hand with gratuitous humor, as if nothing had happened. I was just having fun with another man. She wanted to scream. But of course she was content and relieved that Jack hadn't noticed anything. Her worry about one or two things was simply the result of her obsessively trying to cover her tracks. Jack's greatest shock had come when he told her that he was going to Dixboro at lunchtime. She wanted to believe that she was horrified that she had avoided disaster, but she knew that wasn't true. What she experienced when Jack told the story was not horror, not guilt, but pleasure. The elation that a diver or bungee jumper feels at the moment of rescue from disaster. Success made her merciful, and she felt compassion and sympathy for Jack. Having won, she wanted him to get better. Until next time. It was harder to find a balance with Damien, who showed signs of anxiety and vulnerability as the affair moved from early infatuation to obsession. He loved Caroline in a way that made it hard for him to let her return to her husband. His position was the least secure, and he wanted to be with her always. When he hinted at this, she nonchalantly brushed him off. Dem, it's an affair and we're fine. You see me far more often than most lovers manage. We've got it all worked out. The main thing is not to be greedy. But I'm alone when you leave me. You don't realize how hard that is. Give me a break, Dem. You're the one who wanted a bachelor life with no commitments. We're doing really well, so you don't have to ruin it. If only we could have a weekend away. That could be fixed with a little ingenuity. No. I think you're tough. That's an advantage. I have to be. Once we were lying cuddled in Damien's warm bed, he said, Are we doing it right? Or is this just a dream? I can't bear the thought of you suddenly vanishing into thin air. Don't worry, she replied. What we have is fine, and we know how to make it work. We'll be fine. But it's so risky to live such a secret life. One mistake and we're finished. Unless you leave your husband. I'll never do that. But we won't make a mistake. And even if we do, everyone will survive. Life is too good to make mistakes. But if your husband found out, how would you handle it? He'd never find out. He trusts me. That's his style. But if he did find out, he's a reasonable man, and I'd make him see it from my point of view. I want to spend more time with you, not less. I see so little of you, and it's not enough, considering how much you mean to me. We have to maintain discipline. We agreed. That way we'll be safe. If we can't spend the weekend, I want a whole day together when there's no time pressure, when we can relax, and I'm not thinking every minute about you going back to your husband. Pull yourself together, Dem. You're getting jealous. Someday the opportunity will present itself, and we'll have a great time. But you have to be patient. This month, we can hope. When he shook his head with a sullen look, she grabbed him and pulled him to her. Damien's seductiveness was unsettling. It wasn't at all what Caroline wanted from her lover. His role was to stay strong and understand that her husband was a man who needed protection. She warned Damien to knock it off and rewarded him with a day together. As he said, they just had to figure out how to do it and pick the moment. But she resented his attitude and thought he was selfish. He knew she loved her husband and her family because she had explained it to him from the beginning. She had given him so much, and he had no reason to resent it. And if he was having a hard time dealing with the emotional pressure of having a lover, he had to think about how much harder it was for her. Nevertheless, she was touched by his love in ways she hadn't expected. Of course she loved Dame. She wouldn't have an affair with a man she couldn't love. But her worries about having an affair were nothing compared to his uncontrollable need for her. He wanted to shower her with gifts and carry her off to possess her indiscriminately. A lot of it annoyed and frustrated her because it was unrealistic, but she loved feeling that she meant so much to this man. There were few women in the world that he would love as much as he loved her. His demands caused something akin to guilt, because the only person who hadn't complained throughout was Jack. She didn't think Damien deserved more of her time, but she knew that in order to stay on track, she needed to devote more time to her family. It was only in the last week that she had realized how stressful life at home had become. There was nothing specific to cause her concern, but she felt that Jack was hard to pin down in friendly conversation. Instead, he began to say unpleasant things that reminded her of her secret life. Only the day before at breakfast, he had said, "Why do we have to drink crappy coffee in this house? We can afford better coffee than this stale, cloudy, lukewarm filter crap. I'm sure most people drink much better." Do you know anyone who has one of those automatic bean-to-cup machines that makes the style of coffee you want? He looked directly at her, forcing her to meet his gaze. Have you ever had coffee from such a machine? What was it? I don't know what kind of machine you mean, Jack, she replied with forced calm. But if it bothers you, we could look at the machines over the weekend. As you say, if you want to, I'm sure we could afford it. I'd like to try it first, he replied. I'll find someone who has it and invite them over for coffee. You do that. She missed the bullet and felt mildly excited again at her successful cheekiness, but the conversation alarmed her. What had brought this on, and why was he angry with her about the coffee situation? As far back as she could remember, he was the one who had bought the filter coffee maker that he now thought was so substandard. Back home from Dixboro, Caroline rushed to keep up with family life, cooking meals and running around after the kids. The day Damien disappeared from lunch, she made a special effort and was so busy that she didn't immediately realize that Jack hadn't come up to greet her. What had happened to him? She pushed her worry aside and went about her motherly business. Although Jack didn't seem to know what she needed, she would try to reconnect with him later. When she wanted to go to bed, Jack was working on the computer. She suggested a drink, but he wouldn't join her in the living room, and the idea was forgotten. When the usual bedtime came, he was still working on the estimate for the job. He usually put the work off until later and got up early if necessary to finish it. This time he said he would continue working while all matters were fresh in his mind. Caroline went to bed alone. It bothered her that the affectionate touches that had so often been part of their marriage were now a rarity. They were both busy, and the glue that held them together were the small moments of intimacy. A peck on the lips, a quiet, reassuring caress, a hug at night or while waiting in the kitchen for the kettle to boil. By their very nature, these little actions were unplanned, so it was natural that sometimes there were more of these moments and other times less. She could hardly recall if Jack had initiated such touching after the weekend. Making love was a less reliable test of feelings. They didn't make love after the weekend, but they often missed the opportunity during the week. They always made up on the weekend. Caroline decided that the answer to her fears was simple. Get Jack into bed with her. The next day she cooked dinner, and when Jack arrived, he ignored her greeting and went into the garden where the children were playing on the slide and started a game of roughhousing. What was that? Caroline wondered. She finished cooking the lasagna, set the table, and set out the bread and water. She added some olives and balsamic vinegar, which Jack liked, and called everyone to sit down. The kids were hungry, they had a lot to say about their day, and it was all good. When they had finished, she washed and bathed the children and made them brush their teeth, as she usually did when she was at home. Then Jack took them to bed for a long time, telling stories and chatting. In the meantime, she gave herself a bath and put her thoughts in order, realizing that it wasn't enough to just follow her plan, but that she had to live life to the fullest. That meant she had to give Jack her full attention. Eventually, he came down the stairs and she was sitting in the living room in her robe with a magazine. Would you like a drink? She asked, smiling affably. Not for me. I have to be on the lookout tomorrow to deal with the circling sharks. Trouble at work? I have an idea to relieve the stress. She rose from the couch and headed toward him. Startled, he stepped aside and pointed at her. I've told you so many times not to put your glass on that polished coffee table without a coaster. What was going on? She couldn't remember him ever saying anything like that. Come on, Jack, don't be rude. We don't care about little things like that. It's pointless in a house full of kids. She focused and kept her composure. Are you going to bed? It's getting late, and I thought it might be nice to get us to bed early. Jack shrugged dismissively. I have a cold and I don't want to catch it. He turned to her and she looked at him uncertainly. Indeed, between husband and wife, one need not worry about the transmission of a cold. Maybe, but I'd rather stay away. It's an unnecessary risk. She pulled away, embarrassed again that Jack might be saying things that touched on her secret life with Dem. Next chapter. Jack realizes that his plan has not yielded the results he expected. At home, his relationship is strained, just as he had planned, without compromising the children. Caroline certainly realizes that she has no hope of leading a double life in a comfortable equilibrium. But on the other hand, there's no stopping her from having an extramarital affair. He has to up his game. He sees that they are now seeing each other twice a week, perhaps a consequence of the frustration Caroline feels over Jack's denial of affection. Maybe it's a way to win, to make things worse. So much so that worse can only get better. Caroline should surely realize by now that there is an imbalance in her relationship. Her husband and lover are not equally happy with each other. If she values her marriage, she must make every effort to save her husband. The problem for Jack is that she shows no signs of realizing this. He reads his daughter a bedtime story and sits on the edge of the bed watching her sleep. Tears cloud his gaze as he realizes it's time to act. He must be bold because what follows will be highly unpredictable. He has calculated the risks, and they are not too favorable, but in any case, he has no alternatives. He could lose everything that matters to him. Not only is his life at stake, but everyone he cares about. Fear is unacceptable, and he must show courage. He knows what he must do. Part 2. Caroline rose in the morning in London, discouraged by the complexities of her life. Jack was up early too, and she was confused by his calm and purposeful actions. He made breakfast, listened to the news on the radio, prepared lunch for the children, packed their sandwich boxes, got them out of bed, and dressed them in school clothes. It was all routine, but she wondered what had changed and why she felt uneasy. "What's up, Jack?" she finally asked when she finished fussing and got ready to leave. "Busy day. Lots to do." "Work? Sorry, I can't come back today. It's not fair that you have to run to school in the morning and evening, but I'll catch up next week." "No problem." "Jack, you need to take more care of yourself. You work too hard and never relax. When I get back from this trip, I'll make sure you can have some fun." "That's nice of you, but really I'm fine. I have a lot of fun with the kids." They looked at each other for a moment before Caroline picked up her bag and briefcase and kissed him on the lips, touching the corner of his mouth. "Take care," she said, with a note of concern. "Be careful," he replied. "And don't call tonight. I can take the kids out to eat and I won't answer the phone while we're out." "Don't stay out late." "You too." He turned away. She knew something was wrong, but she had to go, despite the anxiety settling in the back of her mind. There was no time to worry about it now, or she would miss her train. She drove to the train station, trying to make sense of what had happened. What did he mean? Don't call. Of course she would call, and he could have at least texted to assure her that the kids were okay. It sounded like he didn't want to talk to her. Relieved, she boarded the train and at least put the family confusion behind her for the time being. Damien was waiting for her, and as always, he was gorgeous, both soothing her worries and bringing an anticipation of adventure to the day. He was in high spirits. His beloved was completely at his mercy for a while, and he was bubbling over with ideas of what she should do. They quickly agreed on an itinerary: shopping in the morning, lunch, check into the hotel, afternoon rest, evening performance of Cole Porter's highly acclaimed West End musical Anything Goes, dinner, bed. It was a dream day. They stopped for lunch, anticipating an afternoon at the hotel. Damien found a swanky oyster bar in Fitzrovia and suggested she have champagne. She would have preferred to keep her head clear, but agreed to have a glass with smoked salmon and cream cheese in an artisanal brown bread sandwich. They sat on high stools at the bar, leaning against each other. "Here's to many such happy days," Damien toasted, clinking his glass against hers. Before she could respond, his phone rang and he ruined the moment by answering it. She sipped her wine, took a bite out of her sandwich, and watched the color fade from his face. What the hell? He stared angrily in front of him, holding the phone to his ear. "Are you sure? This can't be happening. A letter from me? But I'm not at work. I haven't looked at my personal email since this morning. There must be a mistake. I'll call you back. Damien put the phone down and pulled out his iPad. What's the matter, Dam? What's wrong? He didn't answer right away, but began fiddling with the iPad. Just give me a minute. Something's come up. She stared at him, forgetting about her food. This was no ordinary work problem. He fiddled for a few minutes, then picked up his phone and called. I can't see the message. There's nothing in my inbox. Are you sure it's not a scam? Send me a copy. He hung up, but before she could say anything, the phone rang again. This time he looked grim, listened silently, and ended the call with yes, sir. Now he had time to look at her, and he felt himself getting angry with her. Someone is playing games and this morning sent a message from my personal email account to everyone on my contact list. Apparently it says we're having an affair and claims we met at your work. But how could they do that? And how come the message was sent from your email? Caroline was lost in speculation about what Damien was telling her. You mean, some bastard hacked into my account, told everyone about you, and made derogatory comments about your employers as if they were my professional views. That was my boss talking. The letter has already been copied to your people, and they demand to know what I've been up to. Hell. You know how some of them hated our references, and now they're demanding to know if I've been honest with them or allowed you to unduly influence me. They stared at each other. Her mind had softened under the influence of romance, but Caroline was still trying to comprehend what had happened. It couldn't be serious. It must be a mistake that would soon be sorted out. So what if people at work knew about her and Dem? Did it matter? Of course it mattered, because of Jack. Every few moments a text message popped up on his phone. He glanced at them and at his iPad and shook his head. Look, Caroline, I have to go back. But you can't! Caroline fought back tears of frustration and growing panic. How could this affect us? Come on, Caroline. It had to be your nasty husband who did this. It's obvious if you think about it. Remember the lunch that went missing from my refrigerator? He stopped and thought for a moment. Yeah, that's the one. That bastard has been in my house. This is some kind of sick revenge. He must have sent a message. Where is he now? At work. Caroline paused and focused on her thoughts. But what do you mean, Dem? Jack doesn't know about us. I'm sure of it, just this morning. Her voice broke as she remembered Jack's implacable calm as she prepared to leave. Why had she insisted he knew nothing? The horror of the situation suddenly gripped her throat and she choked on a crumb of bread. Damien turned his iPad to face her. The entire screen showed her graduation portrait with a startling depth of color. What is he doing with that? She burst into tears. Next chapter. The door in front of Caroline has closed, and it's time for action. Jack realizes that he has let fear and depression paralyze him for too long. Nevertheless, he mentally lists all of his actions, reminding himself of the business cliché that every problem is an opportunity. The kids. He has to protect them, but this lie about family won't do them any good. Caroline. His marriage to an unfaithful and lying wife has no future. He is not responsible for her, and the good times they shared cannot be held hostage to the future. Money, home, and practical matters. There are happy families who live on next to nothing. One way or another, they'll get by. Work. To hell with work. He knows what to do and he has the energy to do it. Yes, he's waited too long, but now it's time to tear down the house and share the pain. He puts the kids in the car and gives them letters for the teachers. It's to tell them I'll pick you up at lunch, he explains. I have to meet someone this afternoon, and I can't be sure I'll be back in time for the end of class. We'll go together and have a vacation. You mean I don't have to go to a double French class this afternoon? Ben asks. That's right, just the one time. I'll quiz you on the vocabulary list in the car. I'm not singing with Miss Pritchett. She has scabs on her arms and she's sniffling, Amy says cheerfully. We'll have dinner on the way home, Jack adds. Cool, says Ben. I'd like fish and chips, lots of vinegar and ketchup. You have to be good first, and then I'll see what we can do. The mood in the car picks up and they sing songs as they drive to school. Jack drops them off and drives down the road to Dixboro again, but this time without the pain and confusion of previous visits. He stops right in front of Damien's house, puts on surgical gloves, rings the bells, and after a pause, pulls out his key and enters the house. He goes to the computer and turns it on. Opening Damien's email, he goes to the sent file and looks for a message he's already seen. It's an email Damien sent over Christmas to about 100 recipients, with pictures of his activities over the past year. Successes at work, a new house, vacations, surfing in Australia, skydiving in Arizona, skiing in the Tyrol. Then there are the rugby matches and leagues he has won, the goals he has scored, and the Man of the Match awards he has received, as well as charity work and local politics. In his own estimation, he is a very worthy man. Jack gives the message a cursory reread to remind himself of his chatty, smug style, then cuts and pastes the list of recipients into a new message. It is clear from the names that they include family members, work friends, and acquaintances from various hobbies. He opens another email, which contains a copy of a work email that includes a number of business contacts, including one from Caroline's work. He copies the email addresses into his new message again. Putting everything out of his mind, he begins to write. Greetings, family, friends, and coworkers. I have some hot news for you. Open the attachment and raise a glass to my gorgeous new girlfriend, Caroline. Isn't she stunning? And what a great time we're having. You bet she never lacks energy. I found this sleeping beauty during one of my consulting missions on the outskirts of civilization. Gosh, her employers were unattractive, stupid, and corrupt losers. I dealt with them like blue bottles, and dear Caroline was my prize. The only downside is that she is married and has 2 small children. But I'm working on it, and will let you know when I rid her of her loser husband. Then we'll come visit, and you can meet her in the flesh. And what flesh? Jack pulls out a memory card and loads a file as an attachment to the letter. It's a portrait photo of Caroline taken at her MBA graduation, and she's smiling for the camera, radiant and innocent on the day of her triumph. A photo Jack has always admired. He presses send, deletes the saved copy of the message, removes the memory card, and turns off the machine. 20 minutes after he entered the house, he is back in the car at the Dixboro exit, determined never to visit this place again. On the way out, he tosses the copied door key out the window. He feels better than he has in days. He gets home, showers, changes clothes for the afternoon meeting, picks up a change of clothes, game consoles, and books for Ben and Amy, eats lunch, and goes to pick up the kids. 8 hours later, the 3 of them sit in a Brighton cafe with fish and chips and have dinner. Jack is tired, is in a mild euphoria, and is in no hurry to answer his children's persistent questions. The kids have been energized all day. They've enjoyed their unexpected vacation from school and are invigorated by the food and sea air. He is already starting to lose energy, knowing that he still has to drive home. Going to the bathroom, he turns on his phone and there's a message from Caroline. She's home, demanding to know where he is and to call him immediately. The time bomb of an email explodes. He turns off the phone and goes back to the kids. He's not ready to leave and suggests they eat ice cream while he drinks coffee. Why not stay the night? There are hotels along the sea, and tomorrow will be plenty of time to deal with Caroline. He tells the children about it, and of course they like the idea of staying the night. In the morning, he'll drop them off at school on the way home, and they'll be a little late. I want to go to the beach before we drive home tomorrow, Ben says. I don't have a toothbrush, panda, and teddy bears, says Amy. Don't worry, says Jack. Your teddies are going on vacation too, and I can buy toothbrushes. We'll get up early and walk on the beach before breakfast. He walks into the first hotel he can find and gets a room that can accommodate everyone. It takes him a while to soothe his tired children, but eventually he bathes them, puts them to bed, and puts them to sleep. He himself does not last long. Lying in bed, he sends his wife a message. The kids and I had a great day at the seaside. We'll be back tomorrow. Turning off the light, he reflects on the day gone by. He visited Professor Pickering, the supervisor of his master's thesis, and the year of research he devoted to his doctoral dissertation before family life stopped him. Jack had called him the week before to ask if he could take up his doctorate again, and the professor had offered to come over to discuss it. The kids sat silently with their books in the corner of the professor's cluttered office and were told to behave. The interview went well because Jack kept reading, and the work gave him new insights into his subject, economic history, and especially industrial and maritime economics. They argued vigorously about the current debt crisis and 19th century government subsidies to shipping, which Jack had written about as a student. It was nice to talk about things that interested him and forget about the unfolding tragedy. He allowed himself to relax until he was interrupted by Amy. "Daddy, I don't understand a word you and that man are saying." Jack and the professor laughed, and the conversation immediately turned to joking and discussing the practicalities of being a student again. Jack had decided to work on his doctoral dissertation part. Time, perhaps to convince his employer to reduce his hours. And the professor had found him some maintenance stipends and allowances that might be helpful. Now, lying in bed, Jack ponders whether he should quit his job altogether and study full-time. Let Caroline deal with the financial implications and get on with providing for the family. It's an appealing thought, and he falls asleep in a more positive mood than circumstances would allow. The children wake him by jumping on the bed as the first light of day illuminates the room. He dresses them for school so they are ready to go home. Then they walk across the wet sand at high tide to the pier and back to the hotel for a hearty breakfast. Then he drives home and stops by the school with each child to explain why they were late. "Your wife called," Amy's teacher says disapprovingly. "She didn't think Amy was coming in today." "Got her wires mixed up," Jack says. "She's on a business trip and completely out of the loop." "We were on vacation at the coast," Amy adds offhandedly. "With our dad." Jack suspects that awkward conversations like this will become the norm and smiles at the teacher, trying to radiate good intentions. He imagines Caroline will be at work, but he still doesn't feel like going home. Instead, he drives to work, writes a letter of resignation, and emails it to his boss. He has just received his annual bonus, and his performance review emphasized how instrumental he was in the success of a project to evaluate financial obligations in the acquisition of a small competitor. In its own way, this letter is likely to be as big a bombshell as yesterday's effort. He will talk to a few colleagues, tell them what he did, and be reasonably satisfied with their horrified reaction. Finding no reason for further delay, he drives home. Caroline's car is parked in the driveway, and he doesn't know whether to be pleased or not. Now is as good a time as any for them to talk. He walks into the house and she is furiously wiping down the kitchen. Surfaces. She turns around and they stare at each other in silence. If anything, she's more flustered than he is. "Ben only missed his first class," he says calmly. "I explained it to their teachers so they wouldn't get in trouble for being a little late. I drove them to Brighton." She looks puzzled and nods, still unable to speak. Finally, she says, "Coffee?" He nods too, goes into his office and turns on his computer. He sees several new emails, and they're all on the subject of, "Is it true that you and Caroline are splitting up?" The vibe from his bombshell continues. Caroline comes to his door. "You'd better have coffee in the living room." He follows her in and sits down in a chair. She takes the corner of the couch and begins, trying to maintain eye contact. Her voice doesn't waver, but he notices that when she pauses, her gaze drops, and it takes her a moment to gather her thoughts. "I take it you know." He nods. "And that you sent the letter." He answers nothing. He has no reason to acknowledge anything. "It's wrong, and I don't like to feel bad. I see that I can't fool you, Jack, the man I love. You mean the world to me, and I will love you until the day I die. I thought it was best not to tell you, but it was hard to deal with the fear that you might find out. Damien and I discussed it every which way and would eventually decide that you should know. One way or another, you found out. Damien and I are dating. I love him. I love you too. And yes, we have been in bed. I have to tell you. Please don't take it personally. I wanted to tell you before, but I was afraid of hurting you. His wife looks down at her hands. Bold and defiant, she raises her eyes, but only meets Jack's gaze for a moment. After a while, she continues softly. Damien is a good man, and if you gave him a chance, you would like him. You'd have a lot in common, and he treats me well. He makes me a better person, and you would benefit from that. He likes simple entertainment, dinner, movies, walks in the park. We spend a lot of time in the park. I watch the daffodils and roses come up in bloom. I know you think I'm obnoxious, but he listens to me and helps me sort out my thoughts. He lets me spoil him and tells me I am a star and a beauty, and that you are such a lucky man. I come back to you on top of the world, and I am so happy. I have so much to give you. Life is so full. I thought you must have noticed. He shrugs. I noticed you were cheating on me. How could you think I wouldn't? She shakes her head but hesitates to speak. How long have you known him? She looks at him now. Only 3 months, since we fell in love. And when do you date? When you don't need me. I've been squeamish. She smiles, soothed by her conscience and emboldened by the minimal acknowledgement implied by his questions. Please, I love you very much and I don't care what you think. I'm so glad you're not angry, but you're too deep to read. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that I'm dead. No. I'm thinking about what you've done, and can you really be so stupid? He was unintentionally frank. What is he thinking about? Rage comes and goes like a low-flying warplane, leaving his heart in a frantic rhythm. It's a conversation no man should have to endure. Jack, you won't suffer. Let me be free. There's a part of you I've never had. I need company, friendship, fun, and you've never aspired to that. But Damien likes my playful side, and we have a great time. You need peace. You enjoy sitting alone with your books and your thoughts. That's the time I give to Damien. We'll make it work. Does she want him to agree to her cheating? Jack is aware of sudden physical reactions, like a soldier in the moments after a sniper shot, making feeble attempts to figure out where the bullet hit. He is cold and nauseous, and a stupor is building in the back of his mind, like a premonition of death, a shutting down of reliable internal mechanisms, of vivid thoughts that are not his own. This conversation has been worse than he expected, and the feelings he had suppressed for so long are now out of control. Caroline watches in horror at what is happening. I can see that you're hurting, and I'm sorry that I caused this. Neither of us planned this, and it's very embarrassing. I'm asking you to think about my situation as well. It's hard for all of us, and I need your help to deal with it. We need to help each other. He doesn't meet a human gaze now, afraid of his weakness, but he speaks in a clear voice. If you need a divorce, let me know. Otherwise, I don't think we have anything to talk about. By the way, I'll be living in Brighton during the week, so you'll have to make new arrangements with the kids before and after school. I'll be back at weekends to keep an eye on them. Also, I've quit my job, so after this month you'll have to pay the household bills. Now she looked horrified. Jack, what have you done? What about the kids? You didn't think about them. You didn't think things through. No, Caroline, it was you who didn't think. I've had plenty of time to figure out what I want. I just didn't see any reason to consult you about my decisions. I'm a student again. I'm going to get my PhD. I'm going to rent a place near the university library during the week and come home to my kids on the weekends. You're leaving me? He shrugged. You've been gone a long time. Call this arrangement whatever you want, but it shouldn't affect you much. You can have as many lovers as you want. It doesn't matter to me. But you'll have to be here with the kids during the week, and I'll look after them on the weekends. Is that too difficult for you? It's not a good idea. You have to be sensible, Jack. It's too late. It's all done already. You'd better think about who's going to pick up the kids when they finish school. Maybe I can get back in time to do it on Fridays. I won't be unreasonable. You're making this as difficult as you can. You hate me. I'm going to move on with my life. I don't care what you think or how it affects you. One more thing, he adds. If I ever come home and find your lover here, I'm going to crack his skull open and live happily with the consequences. Keep him away from my house and my children. If you want boy toys, take them to some sleazy hotel. Yes, he wants to make her miserable, but he wants to do the right thing for his children. And the only thing unreasonable is that he acted without consulting Caroline. There's also the matter of the mortgage. He won't be paying anymore. His income has reduced. Caroline should be able to cope with the payments, but he knows money will be tight. She certainly won't want to pay for after-school childcare. The obvious solution, he thinks grimly, is to use his flexible schedule to get free from work and pick them up himself. He falls asleep reading his daughter a story and wakes up at 4 a.m. lying on the bedspread next to her. He goes downstairs and collapses on the living room couch. Soon, he falls asleep again. Next chapter. The new routine started immediately. Jack had gotten up early to load the car with everything he needed in Brighton. He'd drop the kids off at school, drive to work to arrange leave, pick up the kids after school, and then drive back to the university to deal with digs and library access. I won't stay here and interfere with your social life. I'll start research right away and my employers can come and get me if they want. I'm due enough vacation to make it to the end of term. What will we tell the children? She asked machine-mindedly. I'll talk to them on the way home from school. They won't like it, but they won't have to deal with a cheating wife and they'll be fine. I'll promise them to come every weekend. And on vacation, I'll do my best to have them stay with me. But what about me? What about you? The more I can keep the kids busy, the happier they'll be, and you'll have more time for your sweetheart. You're a difficult man, Jack. You know what I mean? I don't want to be alone. I want my family here. Everyone. Yeah. You'll want to be with your lover when you don't have children. Actually, you can call him your partner. We can still be married, but I'm not your partner anymore. That's not what I have with Damien. It's just an affair, I've already explained. Don't try to imagine it's anything more than it is. I don't care how you describe it. You love him and depend on him. I feel like he's your partner. No. You're distorting everything. You are my partner. You are the father of my children and my husband. There shouldn't be anything that could keep us apart. Jack paused for a moment before he spoke, visibly calming himself. Really, Caroline, you deserve this mess, if only to get in touch with the real world. A chat is fine, of course, but I'm busy. No, don't go. Don't reject me. For the first time in ages, she lost her composure and rose to her feet, her voice shrill, her hands reaching out to grab his, tears in her eyes. We have to talk things out. I've worked hard to figure out what happened to me. You need to think about it too. Give me some time. Please. He snorted contemptuously and walked out. Caroline felt like she'd been kicked, and Damien hadn't been much help when she'd called him, wanting sympathy. He couldn't understand why she still hadn't told Jack about the letter and demanded that she do so immediately. She wanted to go to bed and never get up again, but she knew Jack would be back with the children soon. She didn't like to ponder events, but the conversation with Jack was running through her head, and she realized that he had known about Damien for a long time and hadn't said anything. It seemed unthinkable. She'd never considered what would happen if Jack found out about the affair, all such negative thoughts she'd brushed aside. Now she realized how reckless she'd been, deciding without thinking that she'd handle whatever happened one way or another. But Jack's reaction completely surprised her. There was no struggle, no screaming, no tears, just cold determination and a sense that she had disappointed him. Why hadn't he resisted the affair and fought for her return? He had left her, and strangely enough, she felt it belittled what she had done. She wanted to yell at him, "Jack, it's not the end of the world. We can work this out. I'll do everything I can to make sure you're okay. But he wasn't there to hear. Later, the children ran into the house, overwhelmed by the news. Mommy, Daddy's going to live in Brighton, Ben shouted, barely in the doorway. We've been there. It's amazing there. He says we can try the fairground rides on the pier next time we go. And I'm going sea fishing too. We'll have to be up before dawn. She smiled and nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Amy threw herself into her arms and cradled her face in her arms. I want to go with Panda to Daddy as soon as I can because he's going to be lonely alone, she murmured in a way that Caroline strained to hear. Did he say that? Caroline asked softly, not knowing what Jack had told them and not knowing how to respond. He says there are a lot of people at the university, but he always feels lonely when he's not with us. I'm sure you see him a lot, Caroline said. But I'll have to read you bedtime stories during the week instead of Daddy. That's no good. You're always too busy to read it properly. I'll read to myself, and I'll save the bedtime stories that Daddy likes until he comes home to read them with me. Caroline did her best, but kept looking outside to catch Jack as he came in. Where's your daddy? She asked Ben eventually. He said goodbye to us in the car. Said he had to hurry and that he'd pick us up from school on Friday. I think it's a shame he's not here. Tell him that, Mom. Caroline began to realize how complicated her life was going to be, and there were so many problems that she couldn't figure out what to do. She was tormented by the pain of Jack's rejection of her and his stubborn refusal to accept any part of her point of view. Why couldn't he understand that she had to do it, or she would spend the rest of her life feeling that she had missed a rare chance to express and realize herself? He was being unreasonable, but if she was honest with herself, she knew she should have expected it. That was why she had kept her affair a secret, despite her guilt and unwillingness to act dishonestly. She believed that love mattered and they would find a way out. Her love for him and the love he must still have for her. She couldn't believe that he could just stop loving her after so long together. But when she looked into Jack's eyes, she saw indifference and disgust there. Mostly indifference. He had put her out of his mind and was already thinking about life without her. When she relaxed enough to think, the biggest problem was money. How could Jack imagine that she could live on her salary alone? Yes, she was paid well, but her income was already completely depleted. She had never been good at saving money, and there was still a big mortgage to pay. Even worse were the problems caused by the emails at her job. When she returned from London, she went into work and was immediately called into a meeting with one of the executive directors and the head of HR. They questioned her for an hour about her relationship with Damien and the extent to which the affair had triggered the consultant's report that some of the directors had found so unacceptable. She insisted again and again that the affair had started after the report had been written and had taken place completely outside of work. But there was no proof, of course, and by her own admission, she discussed the consultant's findings with Damien. By the end of the interview, it was clear that she was no longer a clever novelty in the eyes of her employers. They hinted that they doubted whether they could keep her in such a demanding position where it appeared she lacked sound business judgment. If she lost her job, she and her children would be left destitute. It kept her up at night. She couldn't turn to Damien. He had more problems with his job than she did, and she couldn't escape the feeling that he blamed her for what had happened. His employers accused him of having an affair with a female client under the guise of consulting. Even worse, they said, was that he allowed an unprofessional situation to develop that damaged the company's reputation. He then compounded the problem by slandering a valued client. His defense was to prove that he did not send the letter. With proper assistance, it was fairly easy to determine the IP address of the computer from which the letter was sent, but it certainly proved that it was his own computer. His assumption that Jack had burglarized his house and sent the email was met with skepticism. There was no evidence of a burglary. On the other hand, he had evidence, albeit inconclusive, that he had been in London when the email was sent. He demanded of Caroline that she get Jack to confess to sending the message. She knew that would not happen. Caroline's once quiet life was now full of drama. When she had started her affair, it had never occurred to her that money would be an issue. She had seen Damien as an additional asset, as a free man with a high-paying job who could take care of the extra expenses, hotels and meals, associated with their affair. Jack earned more than all of them. His resignation was an unexpected and weak response to the situation because it hurt the children as much as anyone else. She wondered how she was going to pay the mortgage, utility bills, and buy food. It was ridiculous to imagine that she could ask Damien for money to help keep the family afloat. But she thought about it anyway. Why not ask Damien for help? Previously, the mistress had been kept by her suitor. She couldn't do that because in her mind the excuse for the affair was that she was strong enough to deal with the consequences. Asking for money would prove that she wasn't. Upon reflection, she decided the best plan was to tell Jack that if he wasn't willing to make a financial commitment, she'd have to ask Damien to help. Jealousy should prompt more humane action. Amy began carrying Panda around the house and only putting her down when Jack came home for the weekend. Caroline told her that this was silly behavior for a 9-year-old girl and shamefully yelled at Amy when she tried to take the battered toy to school. Then she had to spend time trying to calm her daughter down when she herself was tired and wanted to scream. And Ben complained about the dinners she cooked. I don't like onions and cabbage, and that's what you always cook. When I go to Daddy's, I eat fish and chips. You're going to eat what you're given, and it's going to be what we can afford, she told him. The first weekend Jack was home, they could barely sit together in the same room and barely said anything to each other all weekend. Jack spent most of his time with the kids anyway. She looked for an opportunity to discuss the future, but the moment never came. He left on Monday, taking the kids to school on his way out of town. When Caroline arrived at work, she was called into another meeting, this time with the head of human resources. He offered her the position of head of administration and secretariat to replace her current position in operations. The front office no longer trusted her, business judgment, and didn't want her working with clients. As a concession, she would keep her current salary and a note of the decision would be made in her personnel file. If she objected, a Stage 1 disciplinary hearing would commence, with a panel chaired by a board member. Her behavior in connection with the consultant's report would be reviewed. Caroline knew she would have to come to terms with the change in responsibilities. She was relieved to have a job, but had no doubt that the made-up position was a demotion. Back at her desk, she felt she was being humiliated and became very angry. Why was she being punished for something she hadn't done? Her affair had nothing to do with work, and in any case, the letter was a fraud. On Monday evening, she wrote to all the people who had contacted her in response to the email sent from Damien's account. Among them were her parents and many friends. Thank you for your concern. I can't say much, but yes, Jack and I have had some issues that we are working on. The letter you may have seen was a hoax, a criminal act that has caused me a lot of harm and heartache. Please don't add to this and don't believe everything you read on the internet. The amazing news is that after working so long at his bank, Jack has decided to go back to school and get his PhD. Of course, this will require sacrifice from all of us, but we can do it. After all, it's such a good cause. With love from Jack, me and the kids, hope to see you soon. It was in the spirit of bravado on Tuesday that Caroline made her first weekday trip to see Damien since the crash. She had dropped the kids off at school and so couldn't arrive early enough to make up the hours and had to pick them up at the end of the day. She also had a meeting at her new job in the middle of the day, and it was hard to relax under those circumstances. She enjoyed being around Damien, but he seemed tense and reserved, didn't dress up for her, and hardly said anything. Afterward, they drank coffee and picked at the food Damien had brought. Neither of them were hungry, and the somber topic of conversation kept them from enjoying themselves. Damien still wanted proof that Jack had sent the letter and was pressing Caroline to get him to admit it. Jack isn't home. He quit his job and is spending the week in Brighton. He's certainly not in the mood to listen to me. Not only did this news not disappoint Damien, it seemed to make him happy. Then tell him you'll throw him out for good if he doesn't come clean. Don't push me. I don't even know Jack wrote that letter. You may have other enemies. Use your intelligence. Damien was furious. Who else had a motive? Who knew about us and could have gotten your picture? She was quiet for a moment, then said hastily, I'll do what I can. But Dem, we're all right, aren't we? We're not going to let this mess ruin us too, are we? Sure, but we need to sort out our jobs so we can move on with our lives. I'm glad your husband is gone. Now you can give me the time I deserve. She wanted to remind him that she still had her children and tell him that she would do everything she could to get her husband back, but they didn't have much time left. She returned from that visit to Damien, shaken by what had happened and unable to explain the reason for her shock. She never once felt that Damien cared for her or that she had his support. With Jack gone, she needed him and no longer felt any guilt. But as a form of communication, he was hopeless, and they might as well have been strangers. She reasoned that they were stressed and short on time. Things would work out. But she couldn't help but wonder if all they shared was fun, and that now that Jack was gone, she was making impossible demands on the relationship. If that was the case, she'd find the strength to rebuild her relationship with Damien and work on Jack. He'll come back when he's calmed down, she convinced herself. He'll realize it's what's best for the kids, and we can work out a deal so Damien won't be a problem for us. I just need to separate my two men and show each one that I love him. Damien is worried about his job, and Jack is reacting to shock and his pride, nothing more. He doesn't have any money anyway, so he'll have to go back. Every night, Caroline returned home to the rambunctious children and no one to help her. When she finally put them to bed, she was exhausted and saw nothing of interest. She hated her new job and was obsessed with money. And every night she returned to the basic truth of her choice: either stay faithful and save her marriage, or gamble and jeopardize her relationship with Jack. She had chosen the risky path, and she had no one to blame for the way things had turned out but herself. It was embarrassing to think how much she was looking forward to the weekend. Instead of two disgruntled children, it was handsome Jack and her kids, so excited they could barely sit still for dinner. She cooked a family dinner and Ben didn't complain, and Jack told them, the kids, about his week. He worked in the library all morning, went jogging at lunchtime, and lectured in the afternoon. Caroline listened with interest, but made no remarks until afterward. When the children went to bed, she said, Jack, it is very difficult for me to do without your financial participation. They are your children as much as mine, and they deserve better than what they get. You have to realize that. No problem. Give up champagne and smoked salmon and you'll have enough to support yourself. If it's too much, divorce me. I'm sure the court will make me pay at least something, even with my tiny salary. She was shocked. She didn't understand why he was speaking with such vehemence, especially after being so nice at the table. Jack, you're serious. My kids are always hungry when I go out with them. Do you only spend money on your mistress? Wouldn't it be better for them to stay with me? Everything I have, I spend on them, pouring them soup and bread when I don't have enough. They like that. They never go hungry. I feed them all the time. Everything I have, I keep for them. He looked at her intently, and she looked away. He said, Can you honestly say that they are your top priority? I don't think so. Nice try, Jack, making me feel bad, but you're the one who quit your job and left the family home. Why should the woman be the one to take the blame? He shrugged. Because you created this situation. This kind of bickering was pointless. It could only push Jack further away, and Caroline cursed herself for the poor tactic. She really thought that giving up her career was a weak response from Jack, and was unnecessarily punishing the children. They used to split the bills, with Jack's share of the mortgage and utility bills. Together, they amounted to more than the free portion of Caroline's paycheck. It made her bitter, though, she told herself. She still had a home, children, a job, and a lover. All that was missing was a husband, and she would get him back. She must keep her composure and give him time to get over the anger and irritation that had caused him to leave and quit his job. He was hurting the kids, and he will realize his mistake. As for going back to university, That was ridiculous for a man of his age with family responsibilities. She thought better of him, that he would stand and fight to overcome their temporary problems. She would tell him that she expected more from him. Difficulties were creeping up on her. She could no longer pay her credit card bills in full each month. She cut back on necessities, including treats for the kids. Having to organize after-school babysitting became a new expense. Long lunch breaks were now eliminated because she couldn't stay late to make up the hours and pick up the kids. The kids weren't helping, misbehaved, and demanded attention when she wanted to be alone. At first, Damien was phlegmatic about the new obstacles to their meetings. He told Caroline that he was glad Jack was leaving because he wouldn't have to share her. "I'll have Jack back," she replied. "It won't change our relationship in any way, and I want things to be the way they were before." He wasn't allowed to come to the house because of the children, and after the first failed attempt, they had given up meeting at lunchtime. Now they could only meet at weekends when Jack was home with the children. But Damien played rugby on Saturday afternoons, and if there was an away match, before and after. And on Sunday lunchtime, he would meet up with male friends at the pub to watch a football match and play cards. And the weekend was when Caroline really needed to work on Jack. It ticked her off that he acted like he was glad whenever she left the house. She planned to spend her first weekend in her new regime with Damien from Saturday evening to Sunday afternoon. They would go out to dinner and spend the night together. Then she would return to make Sunday dinner for the family, and Damien would go out with friends. Jack stated that it didn't fit into his plans. "I haven't seen my kids all week and I intend to be with them. I'm taking them to Whipsnade Zoo on Sunday. If you want to come with me, I won't stop you, but we leave at 9 and we'll be home late in the evening. Go entertain your lover, but don't worry about dinner. We'll eat outside the house." Caroline was stunned, and for a moment was at a loss for words. This was a key decision. She couldn't refuse to hang out with Damien after she'd promised to be with him, and at the same time, she hated the thought of Jack taking the kids on an outing without her. "You should have said sooner," she finally replied. "I'd love to come, but I can't change my plans." "No problem." He went out into the garden and started playing cricket with his son. She realized she had been outsmarted and made coffee while she thought it over. When it was ready, she went to the back door and watched Jack throw the ball to Ben. "I made coffee," she called out. "Thanks." But Jack continued the game, and she drank her coffee alone, his mug growing colder and colder. She finally decided that if he kept acting like this, she would carry out her plans and not waste her energy on Jack until he was more receptive. He needed time to come to terms with the new order. She emailed Jack her plan for the coming weekend so he would have advance notice and couldn't claim it was inconvenient. This required careful negotiation with Damien. He declined Sunday lunch, and she would be with him from midnight Saturday to 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon. To Jack, she wrote, "The children really enjoyed their visit to Whipsnade. It was a great idea, and I'm only sorry I couldn't make it. But there will be no problem this weekend. The kids have already said several times that they want to go to Fantasy World, which is 30 miles away. So we'll head out early on Saturday and spend the day there. It will be great to have the whole family together again." He didn't reply right away, and when the letter arrived the next day, it was brief. "Great idea, but I'm not participating. I have some shopping to do on Saturday and a lecture to prepare in the afternoon." She immediately called him. "Really, Jack, don't play games. The kids will be so disappointed." "Not if you take them." She wasn't about to admit that her plan would only be acceptable to the kids if Jack came. All week, they'd been pestering her with comments about how the weekend was a long way off, that they wished they were on the coast, that her food was awful and what they'd do with Jack when he arrived. She knew that Jack wouldn't change his mind about the weekend and that his plan had to be to do everything he could to stay away from her. For the first time, she thought about the fact that it would be impossible to win Jack over unless she changed her relationship with Damien. She needed to spend the whole weekend with Jack. She needed the time and space to work her magic. She replied to the email, "Okay, not this weekend then? Everyone is disappointed." One day of vacation solved the problem for one weekend. She would spend a whole delightful day with Damien in the middle of the week, from picking the kids up from school to picking them up from their after-school clubs. In return, she stayed home to take care of Jack all weekend. It was a brief respite in a bleak life. Jack and Damien had to realize how much she needed their company. But that's not the end of the story. If you want a continuation of this story, let me know in the comments. Part 2 will be released 12 hours after this video is published.